Let's talk.
Giles Brown.
No show. The World Cup teams that never were. A treasure trove of famous and forgotten stories from the greatest teams that failed to qualify for the World Cup from the 50s to the 21st century, as well as the great players who never graced the greatest footballing stage. It is a new book out just in time for this World Cup. It is by James Bennett. I'd like to say that James sprints on from the dugout, the super sub that he is, indeed. Ladies and gentlemen, girls and boys, and whatever, it's James Bennett. James, good morning to you, sir.
Morning, thank you very much for having me. Hopefully it's not just a 2-minute cameo that I can give you a good 10-15 minutes run out at the end of the match.
I used to be known as impact player because I used to run on and nobody know what the bleeding hell I was going to do, but there you go. Here's the thing, just explain for the girls and boys what and quote unquote your real job is.
My real job is I work in looking at the future train strategy for Transport for Wales back in the UK. So,
okay.
Something completely different from football. Another passion of mine. I've been working in the rail industry for 10 years. So
the reason for this, because you are doing it for football. You're a football longer, or you're a football fanzine editor, or you put pen to paper about the game, the beautiful game, on a regular basis.
So my background is that I did some writing when I was a student about 10, 15 years ago. So I was working for a website called Sandals for Goalposts, which was an African and Asian football website. We used to cover the Africa Cup nations, we covered the World Cup, and other matches during the year, mainly looking at international football, but also looking at the African club scene. And that opened a few doors at the time, but I was doing it as a student, and then I finished university, got a real job, and put it on the back burner for a few years. And then I was doing a bit of blogging. The idea for No Show is that I started doing blog articles about the greatest teams that didn't qualify for the World Cup. And eventually, over time, I kind of realised, actually, if we compile a few of these together, there might be a book in it. So it's been 7 years of work to get to this point, and now it's on the shelves.
Now, you see, the listeners can't see this because, hey, it's radio, but I can't fail to mention, but over your left shoulder, there seems to be a photograph of Diego Maradona taking on the entire Welsh team. Is this correct?
It's correct that it's Diego Maradona. It's actually the Belgian team.
The Belgians,
Famous picture some of your listeners might have seen from the 1982 World Cup when Belgium actually beat Argentina, and they did so by marking Maradona out of the game. And this picture is a famous representation of that, where he's surrounded by about 5 Belgian players. He got his revenge in 1986, of course, in the semi-final when he took on the entire Belgian defence and beat them all and scored one of his best ever goals.
You see, 82 was the year of the World Cup in España, where I am sitting right now, and we always forget because there was the Nanjarito, which is the little orange mascot, of course. So anyway, let's get our football anoraks off. So if you think of the great players that never played, Keegan, Cantona, George Best, because they were unbelievably brilliant talents. But unfortunately, you think of the case of, Cantona, you just go, hey, how come France didn't qualify for that World Cup when they would go on to win the World Cup and basically everything else with Les Bleus several years later? But somebody like George Best was always going to find it difficult to qualify for a World Cup, even a European Champions at that time, because at that point football in Northern Ireland hadn't been developed to the heady heights it would be for 82, for example.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the thing with George Best was he had his best chance when he was very young in qualifying for 1966, where Northern Ireland actually got a pretty good draw. They had the Netherlands before the Netherlands were particularly good. They had Switzerland and they had Albania. And the way their group worked out was going into their last match against Albania. If they won that, then they would tie up with Switzerland. And back then, they didn't have goal difference to separate ties. It would be a neutral ground playoff. And I think they would have had a good chance of winning that, but unfortunately they conceded a late equaliser to Albania, which was unheard of at the time, and didn't get there. And after that, I think Northern Irish football, obviously the impact of the Troubles, the impact of George Best's personal struggles, it never quite came together. And the last chance he had was in 1982 when they qualified for the World Cup in Spain, and Billy Bingham, the manager, nearly took him to the World Cup as a sort of impact player.
Right.
But unfortunately he said, no, he's not in as good enough shape. It might be a bit of a disruptive influence. And he took Norman Whiteside, who was a teenager at the time, instead.
That would have been interesting, George Best, 1982, because some of the World Cup matches were played in Malaga, which isn't a million miles away from Marbella. He could have gone AWOL and never been seen again. And this was the 80s, this was before social media, of course, and teams and players did go AWOL if they liked, didn't they, for a couple of days or weeks even.
Yeah, and obviously Malaga is a lovely place to go AWOL, because I went there on holiday a couple of months ago and went to a match in La Rosaleda. I thought it was a fantastic experience. Great to say I've been to a match in a World Cup stadium, and there's just something unique about the Spanish stadiums, I think, and the Spanish football culture.
Yeah, indeed. So, I mean, there are several teams that, should have made it but couldn't make it. So is it a case of you're looking at, as we say, the greats? I mean, Cantona, is a footballing legend, and everybody still talks. I mean, you put a picture of Cantona, but he is so unique, and I use that word advisedly, but the problem is with Eric is the fact he is not a team player. I mean, it was Eric and everybody else on his coattails, and he'd famously fallen out with the French national team, and I remember him, because I was but a slip of a lad myself back in '94, and didn't he rocked up to the tournament anyway, with I've got my boots in a bag and I can have a go for anybody if you want.
I hadn't heard that before, but that does strike me as the sort of thing he would do. But yeah, to be fair to Eric, it wasn't his fault in this occasion where France had 2 games left. With 2 games left, all they need to do is win one of them to qualify. And one of those was against Israel, who had never won away from home in a competitive match against a European team. So both those matches were at home in Paris, and they thought, oh, well, yeah, that's it then. We've got their champagne on ice and everything. And then they conceded 2 late goals against Israel and lost. And then they conceded a last-minute goal against Bulgaria and lost, which was pinned on David Ginola, another great charismatic French player who never played in a World Cup. Yeah. Who had the ball in the corner. Instead of taking it into the corner, he lumped across towards Cantona into the box. Cantona was oblivious because he thought he was going to keep it in the corner. Bulgaria picked the ball up and took it up the other end of the pitch and scored. So, yeah, that France team, though, it was such a missed opportunity. I think Cantona would have absolutely revelled in the 1994 World Cup. It was a World Cup defined by sort of talismanic players who pushed their countries forward, like Roberto Baggio, like Romario, Georgi Hagi, Hristo Stoichkov. And I think Cantona would have fitted in very well there. That France team was very well set up by Gerard Houllier. Lots of really talented players, some of whom won the World Cup 4 years later. So it shows the ability was there. Yeah. And that for me was the team that inspired me to write this book, because I think it's almost a forgotten story, certainly outside of France, that there was so much drama associated with that team, but they could have been so good.
The other thing, I mean, England 78, that was another great team. I mean, because everybody knows about the Polish game, etc. And failing, because we had 66. And the interesting thing is, and I picked this up in the brief bit of the book that I've read, because it's people seem to think that England team sort of played like Disney princesses and waltzed their way through to the World Cup finals with this display of brilliant. But it's not like that at all. I mean, they're lucky to get out of the group stage. The match against Argentina, where Alf Ramsey, not perhaps the best diplomat, describes the Argentine players as animals. There's a complete lack of communication between the Argentine captain, who is a brilliant player, and a German referee. And those of you who are sniggering about what happened in Germany and South America, but let's not even go there. But they couldn't communicate, and so it was a close run thing, wasn't it? Is it one of the big myths that England sort of skate through and were always going to win the because they had they came up against Eusebio and Portugal as well. Is it the semis or the quarterfinals? They come very close to crashing out there, and there's some skullduggery as they're involved, James.
Yeah, and of course, and I say this as a Welshman, so obviously, I'm going to point all of this out. They had the sort of stadium choice lined up to make sure that that all their games were at Wembley in the knockouts, and it was a bit of a bad taste in the mouth, especially knowing what happened in the final. But at the same time, Alf Ramsey was a very, very innovative manager, and he recognised that Jimmy Greaves, the fantastic player he was, didn't fit in with that system, and he got injured, and that took him out of the picture for a couple of games. And Ramsey found a way to get it to work with Jeff Hurst. But what you find then is that afterwards, obviously the misfortune of 1970 where they beat in Germany and end up losing.
Yeah.
And then after that, the standard of players that England has, not quite as good. Ramsey gets sacked, perhaps quite unfairly, after not qualifying in 74. He said the game against Poland was key to that.
Yeah.
And then into the chapter of the book, which is the team that didn't qualify in 1978, which was managed by Don Revie, who was one of the great managers of English football, who wasn't quite able to bring those players together, and was very unlucky with injuries and terrible draws. Didn't qualify ultimately in 78 because they got beaten by Italy, and I think that's always going to be a tough ask.
Yeah. And looking at the home nations, I mean, you look at the Scots. Ian Rush, he's on the front cover. A great player, and again, very because Wales qualified for World Cups before, was it? They qualified for 56, hadn't it? If I remember correctly. So
58, yeah.
58, excuse me. So therefore, Rush, players like Ian Rush never graced the World Cup finals. Which again, he was a player for the big occasion.
Yeah, absolutely. And, the team that I picked was the 1986 Wales team, which also had Mark Hughes up front as well. So in fantastic strike partnership between Ian Rush and Mark Hughes. Unfortunately, Rush missed the start of the campaign due to injury, which coincided with Wales having a very embarrassing defeat to Iceland, which kind of set it on a bad start. They recovered well. They beat Spain in Wrexham, famously, with Hughes scoring an incredible goal. And by the end, it looks like they've got the momentum to push through, but they play Scotland in Cardiff. And then you get the famous match where Jock Stein, the legendary Scottish manager, dies on the side of the pitch in awful circumstances just after Scotland had scored a late equaliser. Scotland end up qualifying and Wales don't. And I think it's a real shame for that Wales team in particular because it adds strength all over the pitch. I think what you find sometimes with Wales is you get one or two really good players, but we haven't quite got the depth across the whole pitch. I think that 86 team, it was strong in defence. Neville Southall, one of the best goalkeepers ever, in my opinion. Defence for Kevin Ratcliffe in it, based around really good Everton team. Some really good midfielders like Robbie James, Mickey Thomas, really creative, hard-working. And then Rush and Hughes up front. And, it was strong everywhere, and I think we could have done really well in '86 if we'd actually qualified, but unfortunately not to be.
Now, Pelé famously said that he saw an African nation winning the World Cup before the 20th century was out. Unfortunately, the great man wasn't as great as a pundit as he was, but African nations, and you have obviously some experience in this. They tend to, you have, it almost tends to be, I mean, now we know how an expanding World Cup. So, you've got Uzbekistan sort of qualifying it. I know that's not in Africa before you leap in there, but you've got these nations coming in. Because before it was always going to be Nigeria, Nigeria, Cameroon, Morocco, Egypt to a certain extent, but you can get some standout players from the smaller nations. Obviously, Liberia, George Weah, for example, who was an incredible player. But again, the rest of the team, perhaps because of African reasons, don't qualify.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that story of Liberia with George Weah. I know they came so close in 2002. Weah was right at the end of his career, but he was doing so much. He was basically paying for the team to travel. He was acting as the player's agent to get them moves to better clubs so that they could improve. He was effectively the manager of the team, and he was playing himself in midfield because he recognised that they actually had some really good strikers and he could play in midfield and operate from there. And it nearly worked. They nearly beat a really good Nigeria team to qualify. It's just it unravelled slightly at the end, but it's a fascinating story. Obviously, George Weah being such an icon in Liberia, he ended up becoming president of the country. So, and I think it also kind of shows, as you say, the development of African football in that for a while it was a small number of countries that dominated African football. The expansion of the World Cup, and I think particularly the expansion of the Africa Cup of Nations, has really helped drive the standard of African football because it's given a lot of countries the incentive to push on because actually qualifying is achievable now. And the vast majority of countries in Africa have qualified now for an Africa Cup of Nations, I think. So it's so competitive. Nigeria aren't there this year. Cameroon aren't there this year. it's improved so much that you got all these countries like Cape Verde coming in for the first time qualifying. Incredible achievement for such a small country. So, I'm really excited for the future of African football. It's in a really good place.
And also, you get a lot of, sort of young African, players from Africa going and playing in Europe in the big leagues, in La Ligue, in the Bundesliga, in the Premier League as well, which perhaps didn't happen so much. Especially thinking like Tunisia, Morocco, Egypt players, they are moving around as well quite a lot, aren't they?
Yeah, absolutely. And as I think there's a lot more, the clubs are taking a lot more seriously as a way of scouting for talent. They'll send their scouts out a lot earlier to get African players over. It kind of works both ways as well, though, because there's a lot of sort of players who are born in Europe who then go and play for African countries through the changes of the rules to allow players to change nationality and the grandparent rules. So, African countries have also benefited from that as well. Like Brahim Diaz is probably the best example of a Spanish player or Spanish-born player who plays for Morocco. He's the face of Moroccan football. And he's going to lead that team with a really good chance that they play Brazil on the weekend in their first game. That's going to be a fascinating game, I think.
Well, one of the names that you've got in there is Cruyff. Now, this is an interesting because according to your your research, we may have not. Cruyff might have been in that book because of Holland. This is true. I mean, how does Cruyff almost end up in the book then?
So what happened was, for qualifying for 1974, the Netherlands were up against a very good Belgium team. And obviously, only one of those two could qualify. It was a very small group. The other two teams in there weren't particularly good. So it's basically who can rack up the most goals against those teams, and whoever got goal difference benefit would qualify, unless you could win one of those two games between each other. The first one was a draw. So then in the last game between the Netherlands and Belgium, it's 0-0. The manager of Belgium, Raymond Gotals, who went on to win the European Cup with Marseille, he took the decision like, okay, Belgium need to win. What we're going to do is going to play really defensively. And the Dutch won't necessarily know what to do, because this wasn't quite the coherent Dutch that we saw in the World Cup a year later. It was a different manager. The players weren't necessarily always getting along. They couldn't break down the Belgium team. Belgium hadn't conceded a goal in the entirety of qualifying. They were very good at just absorbing that pressure. And then in the last 5 minutes, Belgium suddenly just really went for it. They got a free kick deep in Dutch territory with about 2 minutes to go, knocked the ball in. Belgian player heads it in. They seemingly have scored the goal that's going to take them to the World Cup. Then the referee disallows it for offside, even though from the footage you can see it's quite clearly not offside. So the Dutch escape. They get their 0-0 draw. They qualify on goal difference. Belgium are left to rue what might have been. They're the only team, as far as I'm aware, who have failed to qualify for the World Cup without conceding a goal. The Dutch go on, they change the manager, bring in Rinus Michels, who's the legendary Ajax manager, completely transforms the way they play, and of course they get to the World Cup final. Johan Cruyff becomes a global superstar. It could easily have been that they never would have had that opportunity. So I find that fascinating, that Cruyff could be almost like not a complete unknown, because Ajax had won the European Cup by then, but he could have been like Alfredo Di Stefano, like George Best, one of those great players that never qualified. Because of course 4 years later he's still playing, but he refuses to go to the World Cup because of a previous kidnapping situation. He was afraid for his family safety. Yeah,
fascinating. And then, because Cruyff becomes a global superstar because he is part and parcel of that, of that run up when they play West Germany in 74. Refereeing decisions. I mean, there are some little heartbreaks, aren't there? There are some inexplicable refereeing. I mean, we bitch about VAR, but you look at some of the refereeing decisions that have taken place, and you go, "Are you sure about that?" And because they do end for sort of heartbreak. I mean, this book has got some absolute heartbreaking tales of last minute goals, dodgy decisions, managerial sort of meltdowns, and putting on 8 defects. Like you just said with the Belgian match. So apart from Belgium, I mean, what are the ones that were sort of tugs on your football heartstrings, James?
For me, it's Ireland in 1982.
Right.
They were up against they were in a really tough group. They were against France, Belgium, and the Netherlands. And only 2 of them could qualify. Unfortunately, they have a goal wrongly disallowed against France, a match that they then lose in France. And then in Belgium, they have a goal wrongly disallowed, but also the referee then kind of gives Belgium a late free kick for a blatant dive. Free kick goes in, goalkeeper's quite clearly impeded, but the ball gets nodded in and they have a goal. So they get screwed over like 3 different times by the same referee. That referee, Raul Nazare, is notorious in Irish football for that match.
Right.
They'd been affected by previous refereeing decisions not going their way. I think that was just kind of the way that football was back then. It just seemed to consistently affect Ireland. And it would carry on, of course, in 2010 with the Thierry Henry handball. But, you know, that particular Irish team was really, really good. It was probably a better Irish team than the one we saw at the World Cup a few years later under Jack Charlton. They played a lot more attractive football. You had Liam Brady, who was one of the best players in the world at the time, Frank Stapleton, Mark Lawrenson. But they just missed out on qualifying to France, who were really good, and Belgium. So... yeah, it's just kind of a case of what might have been there, and it all kind of drifted a bit after that for a few years.
So if you had to put sort of like one player who should have been there, you think would have set the World Cup, you know, Di Stefano, what are you going to say? Because, I mean, he was part of the Hungarian... you know, and again, it's difficult to understand because there's not a lot of footage around. It's not like you were getting, but Di Stefano was one of, I mean, he is, even today in a Real Madrid, and as you know, James, Real Madrid isn't a team. It's a monster that eats players and spits them out. There has to be, the politics of Spanish football, and especially in the 50s. I mean, Di Stefano is brilliant, and it's Hungary, isn't he? Di Stefano but despite the name, is he Hungarian? That's his nationality?
He's Argentinian originally.
Okay, you're right, sorry.
So Argentina don't qualify or don't go to World Cups in the 50s, but I think there's also the sort of political angle of he leaves Argentina at one point to go and play in Colombia for the breakaway El Dorado League for lots of money.
Right.
Actually I think he plays for Colombia unofficially as well. So he plays for 3 different international teams. But kind of after that, all that kind of falls apart. He comes over to Real Madrid, and eventually they get him Spanish citizenship, and he joins in this incredible Spanish team with Laszlo Kubala, who was the great Barcelona player, Luis Suarez, who goes on to play for Inter in the 60s, wins the European Cup, Paco Gento. Basically, it's like an all-star team at that point.
Yeah.
And that team, you think, oh, that's going to be getting to like a World Cup final. But they don't even qualify. They lose to Scotland because I think it's almost like too much of a super team. It's not quite gelling together. Plus, there's this kind of urban legend that they go to Scotland, they lose 4-2, and it's because the Spanish players are not used to playing in the cold weather in Glasgow. I'm not sure how true that is. There's very little footage. I managed to find a little bit when I was researching, but yeah, it's bizarre story. Di Stefano's there in the squad in 62, but a week before the tournament, he gets injured and never plays. Never plays in the World Cup. Neither does Kubala. And I kind of think, again, as with France in 94, you think if Spain had got to that World Cup in 58, by the time the World Cup had come around, they probably would have sorted things out a bit more, and the squad would have gelled a bit. And I think we missed out on the defining match of that generation, which would have been Di Stefano's Spain against Pele's Brazil, because Pele was there as a 17-year-old, and the 2 great players, the greatest player of the 50s and the greatest player of the 60s, going head to head, but we never got to see it, and I think that's a real shame.
What are you hoping that people are gonna learn or discover in your book, No Show? Is it that football is that cruel mistress of the cruelest of all mistresses, as it were?
I think the big thing that struck me, like when you kind of line up all of these teams, when I was kind of pulling them all together, seeing the threads that come out, it's the fine margins, really. Even for a great team with great players, it's so hard to actually qualify for a World Cup because one slip and you don't get there. And we've seen that with Italy in the last 3 World Cups now. They've got good players, you can't argue with that, but they keep on running into teams in playoffs who keep getting past them, undermining them, whether it be Sweden, North Macedonia or Bosnia now. So I think and particularly when you go further back, it was so hard to qualify because you get a group of 4 or 5 teams and only one would be qualifying, or particularly outside of Europe where there are so few places available to qualify. It's really, really difficult. And there's some really heartbreaking stories of teams that are like quite clearly very good, but they lose one match and that undoes it for them. So, and as well, the kind of the influence of other factors as well, like politics and just outright tragedy in the case of one or two teams, like the Zambia team that died in the plane crash in 1993.
Sure.
You got the politics of the East Germany team that they qualified in 1990. Having the Berlin Wall come down a week before their last match, which disrupted their preparations. And there's so many like outside factors that kind of influence things that, regardless of how good you are, you can be undermined by that. So that combination of those two things are really what stands out. I tried to make it a story with football in it rather than just a football story.
And it's a story full of triumphs and tragedies, and that surely is what the beauty of the game is. Can't let you go without because we're on the eve of the World Cup. They're all flying out there. I love the fact that Iran have gone somewhere that isn't going to be as dangerous for them, and that's Tijuana, perhaps one of the most dangerous cities in the world. You must have a soft spot, obviously, because of your background for some of the African nations. So, how do you think this one's going to play out, James?
I think the World Cup always throws up lots of surprises. So I'm looking forward to seeing what the football gods have to deliver for us. But I think it's the most open World Cup of my lifetime. So, I'm 35. My first World Cup that I watched was 98. I cannot remember a World Cup where you've got 6 or 7 teams that genuinely have a really, really good shot of winning this. I think England have got a really good squad. They've probably got the deepest squad overall. Can Thomas Tuchel get them playing together? There've been flashes where I think they've looked really, really good. You got Spain, who were really good 2 years ago. I think they're possibly not quite as strong as they were 2 years ago. France have always got a fantastic set of players. They lost to Ivory Coast last night in a friendly. You got Germany, who are always there. Brazil and Argentina, can Lionel Messi win the World Cup again? I mean, that'd be an incredible story if he can. Brazil with Ancelotti, Portugal. There's so many, and the thing is, that one or two of those teams will somehow either not get out of the group or fall really early. One will end up playing another really early, and then it'll all come together in the semi-finals. And the semi-finals of the World Cup are always the best. I mean, obviously. The last World Cup final was incredible. It was one of the best games I've ever seen. But I'm really looking forward to seeing how the quarters and the semis work out. We could have a England against Brazil quarter final, which would be amazing, I think. The ghosts of 1970 and all that come to pass as well. The book is called No Show: World Cup Teams That Never Were. It is by the brilliant James Bennett, who we're speaking to today. James, if people want to find you online, say nice things, or basically say, I think so and so. I think Vinnie Jones should have gone to a World Cup. Where that was a Wales team and a half. Where can they find you online?
Now
I'm visualising Bobby Gould at a World Cup with Vinnie Jones as his captain.
Exactly.
That would be insane.
Exactly. The silky skills. Go on. Where can we find?
My social media handles across most of the platforms are J Bennett Writer, so it's Bennett with 2 N's and 2 T's. So you can find me on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, various other places. Books available from all good retailers. Yeah. And I'd support your local bookshop as well if you can. That would be really great. And this book's out now, and hopefully a sequel in time for the Euros in a couple of years' time.
Brilliant. James, I'm going to crash the news. Thank you so much for your time today.